Welcome to our deep dive into ancient Egypt. We're going to kind of uncover some fascinating stories and insights about this civilization that thrived for over 3,000 years.
Mm.
Think you know ancient Egypt? Get ready for some surprises because we're going to be going beyond the typical pharaohs and pyramids narrative to understand what life was truly like and what lessons we can learn from their triumphs and eventual fall.
It all starts with the Nile River, the lifeblood that pulsed through the civilization. We often hear about its importance, but what's really intriguing is how the Egyptians viewed the Nile's annual floods. They weren't just a natural phenomenon, they were woven into the fabric of their religious beliefs and understanding of the cosmos.
So it wasn't just about the practical benefits of irrigation and fertile land.
Exactly. The Egyptians saw the floods as a divine act, a gift from the gods, specifically Hapi, the god of the Nile. They even had elaborate rituals and festivals to celebrate and appease Hapi, ensuring a bountiful flood each year.
That makes their relationship with the river so much more profound than just practical necessity. It speaks to a deep reverence for the natural world. But I'm curious, how did they predict and manage these floods? Didn't they need a pretty sophisticated system to harness that power?
They did. That's where the Nilometers come in. These weren't just simple measuring sticks. They were intricate architectural structures designed to track the flood levels with remarkable accuracy. Imagine these elaborate wells and staircases leading down to the Nile, with markings that indicated the height of the water. They even had priests dedicated to interpreting the readings, connecting them to agricultural planning, and even predicting the future.
It sounds like a blend of science, engineering, and religious belief all rolled into one. It makes you realize just how advanced their understanding of the natural world was. But let's shift gears a bit. How did this civilization even come together in the first place? We often talk about ancient Egypt as this unified entity, but it wasn't always that way, right?
You're absolutely right. Before the iconic pharaohs and pyramids emerged, there were two distinct regions, Upper Egypt in the south and Lower Egypt in the north. And it took a powerful figure to unite them. Enter King Narmer, nicknamed the Fighting Catfish.
The fighting catfish. Now that's a name that sticks in your memory. What makes this Narmer so special?
He's credited with unifying Upper and Lower Egypt around 3000 BC, a feat depicted on the iconic Narmer palette. It's this intricately carved slab that shows him wearing the crowns of both Upper and Lower Egypt, symbolizing his dominion over the entire land. It's basically a visual declaration of a unified Egypt.
It's incredible how a single artifact can capture such a pivotal moment in history. But unification often comes with conflict, right? Was it a peaceful merger or more of a hostile takeover?
The Narmer palette does depict scenes of conquest, suggesting it wasn't all sunshine and roses. But this unification laid the groundwork for what we know as ancient Egypt, a powerful and enduring civilization. And speaking of powerful figures, let's talk about the term pharaoh, which we so often use to describe their rulers.
Yes, Pharaoh conjures up images of grandeur and absolute power. But was that term used from the very beginning?
Actually, pharaoh came into use much later. In the early dynasties, rulers were simply called kings, or neswet. But the interesting thing is that regardless of what they were called, these rulers were seen as divine beings embodying gods like Horus and Ra.
Wow, talk about pressure. Imagine being considered a living god. Did they have specific rituals or beliefs to reinforce this divine status?
Absolutely. There were elaborate coronation ceremonies where pharaohs received symbols of their divine power, like the crook and flail, representing their role as shepherd and protector of the people. Hymns and texts praised their wisdom and connection to the gods, emphasizing their unique role as intermediaries between the heavens and the earth.
It's fascinating how these beliefs shape their entire worldview. But speaking of iconic symbols, we can't forget about the pyramids. How did these monumental structures come to be? Did they just appear out of thin air?
Not quite. It's actually a story of innovation, ambition, and even a few spectacular failures along the way. Early on, Egyptian tombs were called mastabas, flat-top structures made from mud brick. Think of them as the precursors to the pyramids.
So who made the leap from these simple mastabas to those colossal pyramids we see today?
It all started with a brilliant architect named Imhotep, who served under Pharaoh Djoser. He's credited with designing the step pyramid at Saqqara, the first large-scale structure built entirely from stone. It was a revolutionary concept, essentially stacking 6 mastabas on top of each other, creating a stepped pyramid shape.
That's incredible. It's like he took the basic concept of the mastaba and elevated it literally to new heights. But I imagine there must have been some trial and error before they perfected the pyramid design.
There were. In fact, Djoser's predecessor, Sneferu, had some less than successful attempts at pyramid building. One of his pyramids, known as the Maiden Pyramid, actually collapsed during construction, leaving a rather odd, truncated structure behind.
A collapsed pyramid. That must have been a major setback. What went wrong?
It seems they had some structural issues. The angle of the pyramid's sides was too steep, putting too much stress on the lower levels. It's a reminder that even the most ambitious projects can go awry, even for the ancient Egyptians.
It makes you wonder if there were consequences for such failures. Did architects face the pharaoh's wrath if their pyramid crumbled?
While there's no record of Imhotep facing any punishment for his predecessor's collapsed pyramid, it's safe to assume that the pressure to succeed was immense. These were, after all, projects of immense scale and religious significance.
Speaking of ambitious projects, let's talk about the Great Pyramid of Giza, the most iconic of them all. What makes this particular pyramid so special?
It's a testament to the Egyptians' engineering prowess and organizational skills. Built under Pharaoh Khufu, it's estimated to have taken around 23 years to complete, using a staggering 2.3 million stone blocks. Imagine the logistics involved in quarrying, transporting, and assembling those massive blocks, all with incredible precision.
23 years and millions of stone blocks. That's mind-boggling. But what about the whole slave labor myth? Was it really built by hordes of enslaved people?
That's a common misconception. Evidence suggests that the workforce was primarily made up of skilled artisans and laborers who were compensated for their work, receiving food rations, and even housing. There's even evidence of team names and a sense of pride in their work, with inscriptions like Friends of Khufu or Drunkards of Menkaure found near the pyramids.
So it's more like a massive public works project than a brutal system of forced labor.
It seems that way. The pyramids were not only tombs for the pharaohs, but also symbols of national pride and religious devotion. Building them was a collective effort that involved a complex web of skilled workers, engineers, and religious officials.
It's fascinating to think about how these pyramids, intended to ensure the pharaoh's eternal afterlife, ended up having such a profound impact on the development of Egyptian society as a whole. But even the most powerful civilizations faced challenges. What eventually led to the end of this era of pyramid building, the so-called Old Kingdom.
Well, one factor was a recurring issue for ancient civilizations, the problem of succession. One pharaoh, Pepi II, ruled for an incredibly long time, over 90 years. By the time he died, the system of succession was strained, with potential heirs vying for power.
That's a long reign.
Yeah.
It's almost hard to fathom ruling for that long. But was it just internal power struggles that brought down the Old Kingdom?
There were other contributing factors as well. Remember how central the Nile was to their civilization? Around the time Pepi II died, Egypt was hit with a severe drought, a well-documented climate shift known as the 4.2 kiloyear event.
So even back then, they had to contend with the impacts of climate change.
It certainly seems so. This drought led to reduced Nile floods, which meant less food and ultimately widespread famine and unrest. It weakened the central authority of the pharaoh and created an opening for regional powers to assert themselves.
So it was a perfect storm of internal strife and environmental challenges. It's a reminder that even the most advanced societies are vulnerable to the forces of nature.
Precisely. This period of turmoil marked the end of the Old Kingdom and ushered in a new era, known as the First Intermediate Period. It was a time of decentralization and conflict, with different regions vying for power.
So it's back to square one. No more unified Egypt.
Not so fast. Even in times of chaos, there's always someone vying to restore order. During this period, two powerful cities emerged as rivals, Thebes in the south and Heracleopolis in the north.
So it's a North versus South showdown. Who eventually came out on top?
It was a long and bloody conflict, but eventually a ruler from Thebes named Mentuhotep II emerged victorious. He reunited Egypt, ushering in the era known as the Middle Kingdom.
The Middle Kingdom. So what's different this time around? Are we back to pyramid building frenzy?
Not exactly. While they continued to build pyramids, the Middle Kingdom was marked by a shift in focus. They emphasized strengthening the empire, expanding that influence into Nubia to the south, and developing new agricultural projects to ensure stability and prosperity.
Nubia. Wasn't that a region rich in gold and other valuable resources? It seems like a strategic move to secure those resources.
It was. This expansion was part of a larger effort to secure Egypt's borders and access to vital resources. But the Middle Kingdom wasn't just about military might. It was also a time of cultural flourishing.
Oh, this is where it gets really interesting. Tell me more about this cultural renaissance. What kind of art literature or new ideas emerged during this period?
Well, this is where we see the emergence of what we might call literature, not just religious texts and hymns, but stories focused on ordinary people, like the tale of the shipwrecked sailor.
The story about a regular person, that's a pretty big departure from the usual Pharaoh-centric narratives.
Yeah.
What's this story about?
It's about a sailor who finds himself shipwrecked on a deserted island and encounters a giant talking serpent. It's a tale of adventure, survival, and even a touch of the supernatural. It gives us a fascinating glimpse into their storytelling traditions and what captivated their imaginations.
It sounds like a page-turner. I'd love to get my hands on a copy of that. But beyond these new literary adventures, what was life like for everyday Egyptians during the Middle Kingdom? Did they have jobs, families, worries, just like us?
They did. We get a fascinating glimpse into their daily lives from a text known as the Papyrus Lancing. It's essentially a scribe complaining to his student about all the terrible jobs out there, trying to convince him that being a scribe is the best option.
So it's like an ancient career guidance pamphlet, but with a lot more complaining. What kind of jobs was he dissing?
He gripes about washermen being constantly tired, potters covered in mud, cobblers smelling bad, and florists sweating all night. He paints a rather bleak picture of manual labor, clearly trying to steer his student toward a more comfortable intellectual path.
Well, I can't say I blame him, but it does give us a glimpse into the diverse range of professions that existed in Egyptian society. But what about food? What did the average Egyptian eat?
They had a surprisingly varied diet, actually. Bread was a staple, often made from emmer wheat, along with a variety of vegetables like onions, garlic, lettuce, cucumbers, and even melons.
Sounds pretty healthy. Did they eat meat as well?
Meat was more of a treat, usually reserved for special occasions or the wealthy. They ate beef, lamb, pork, goat, and a variety of birds. And of course, no Egyptian meal would be complete without beer.
Beer. Now you're speaking my language.
Yeah.
Were they big beer drinkers?
Huge. Beer was a daily drink for people of all social classes. It was a safe alternative to water, which could sometimes be contaminated, and it was even considered a nutritional staple, providing essential calories and nutrients.
So it was like their version of a multivitamin. I'm starting to see why they were so fond of this beverage. But speaking of things they were fond of, I have to ask about their famous feline companions.
Ah, yes, the cats. The Egyptians' love for cats is well documented. They weren't just pets, they were revered as symbols of grace, intelligence, and even divinity.
So it wasn't just about their cuteness. Was there a practical reason for this adoration?
Absolutely. Cats were incredibly useful for controlling rodents that threatened their grain supplies. They were essentially miniature pest control agents, protecting their food sources and preventing disease.
That makes sense. But how did this practical role evolve into full-blown cat worship?
Cats became associated with the goddess Bastet, depicted as a woman with the head of a cat. Bastet was a powerful goddess representing protection, fertility, and even music and dance. So cats became imbued with these divine qualities, and harming a cat was considered a serious offense.
So they went from pest control to divine protectors. That's quite a promotion. It's amazing how these seemingly small details reveal so much about their culture and beliefs. But even with their love of cats and their growing prosperity, the Middle Kingdom, like its predecessor, eventually faced its own set of challenges.
You're right. And those challenges came from a rather unexpected source. The Hyksos, a mysterious group of outsiders who arrived in Egypt with advanced weaponry and military tactics that shocked the Egyptians.
The Hyksos, who were they? Where'd they come from?
Their origins are still debated, but they seem to have been a group of people from the Eastern Mediterranean, possibly from the Levant. They arrived in Egypt during a time of political instability and brought with them something that would change the course of Egyptian history: the chariot.
The chariot. So they were basically the ancient equivalent of a tank division rolling into town.
It's a good analogy. The Egyptians had never seen anything like it. These fast, mobile war machines driven by horses gave the Hyksos a significant military advantage. Imagine the shock and awe the Egyptians must have felt facing these unknown warriors with their advanced technology.
It must have been terrifying. So what happened? Did the Hyksos just take over Egypt?
They managed to conquer a significant portion of Egypt, including the Nile Delta and even the ancient capital of Memphis. This period of Hyksos rule is known as the Second Intermediate Period, and it marked a significant blow to Egyptian power and pride.
So Egypt, once the dominant power in the region, was now under the control of these foreign invaders. That must have been a humiliating experience.
It was a challenging time for the Egyptians, but it also sparked a fierce determination to reclaim their land and restore their independence. A new dynasty arose in Thebes, determined to expel the Hyksos and usher in a new era of Egyptian power.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat. Who were these liberators? What strategies did they use to take on the Hyksos and their fearsome chariots?
Remember that new dynasty rising in Thebes, determined to reclaim their land. They weren't going to let these outsiders just waltz in and take over. It was a long and arduous struggle, but they eventually figured out a way to beat the Hyksos at their own game.
So they adopted chariot warfare. I bet that wasn't an easy transition.
You're right, it wasn't. There were initial attempts to fight the Hyksos using traditional Egyptian tactics, but those proved largely ineffective against the speed and maneuverability of the chariots. The Egyptians had to learn and adapt quickly if they wanted to regain control.
Makes sense. So how did they turn the tide? Did they manage to get their hands on some chariots of their own?
That's exactly what they did. They started incorporating chariots into their own army, training their soldiers in this new form of warfare. They also studied Hyksos military tactics, learning their strengths and weaknesses.
So they turned the enemy's technology against them. It's a classic strategy. But wasn't there more to it than just acquiring chariots? Didn't they need skilled charioteers and horses as well?
They did, and acquiring those resources took time and ingenuity. They had to establish breeding programs for horses, train skilled charioteers, and develop new tactics that incorporated these war machines effectively. It was a process of learning, adapting, and innovating.
It sounds like they were going through a military revolution, transforming their entire army to counter this new threat. Who led this charge? Was there a particular pharaoh who spearheaded this resistance?
There were several key figures, but one of the most pivotal was Ahmose I, the founder of the 18th dynasty. He was a brilliant military strategist who completed the expulsion of the Hyksos and laid the foundation for what would become the New Kingdom, a period of unprecedented power and prosperity for Egypt.
Ahmose I, the Hyksos slayer. He sounds like a true hero. But I imagine expelling the Hyksos wasn't the end of their troubles, right? Didn't they face other challenges as they rebuilt and reasserted their dominance?
They did. One of the key challenges they faced was securing their borders. Remember those expansions into Nubia during the Middle Kingdom? Well, those territories had become increasingly independent during the Hyksos period, and Ahmose was determined to reestablish Egyptian control.
So he had to fight on multiple fronts against the Hyksos in the north and the Nubians in the south.
Yeah.
That's a tough balancing act. How did he manage it?
He was a skilled military leader and a shrewd diplomat. He launched successful campaigns into Nubia, reasserting Egyptian authority and securing access to valuable resources like gold and other raw materials. He also strengthened alliances with neighboring kingdoms, creating a buffer against potential threats.
It sounds like he was laying the groundwork for a powerful empire. So what came next? Did his successors continue his expansionist policies?
They did. The new kingdom saw Egypt expand its influence further than ever before, reaching into the Levant and even clashing with the Hittites, a powerful empire in Anatolia. This was a period of ambitious military campaigns, monumental building projects, and the rise of some of the most iconic pharaohs in Egyptian history.
Okay, this is where things get really exciting. We're talking about the likes of Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, Ramesses, the great names that have become synonymous with ancient Egypt.
Exactly. And each of these pharaohs left their own unique mark on Egyptian history, shaping its culture, religion, and political landscape in profound ways. But before we delve into those iconic figures, there's one pharaoh we need to talk about, Thutmose III.
Thutmose III. I'm not as familiar with that name. What makes him stand out?
Well, he's often overshadowed by his stepmother, Hatshepsut, one of the few female pharaohs of Egypt who reigned for over 20 years.
Hatshepsut, I've heard of her. She was the one who built that incredible temple at Deir el-Bahri, right?
Yeah.
But what does this have to do with Thutmose III?
He was actually Hatshepsut's stepson and her co-regent. However, when Hatshepsut died, Thutmose III came into his own, embarking on a series of ambitious military campaigns that expanded Egypt's empire further than ever before.
So he was a warrior pharaoh, eager to prove himself after years of being in Hatshepsut's shadow.
That's one way to interpret it. He was a brilliant military strategist, leading his armies to victory in numerous battles and expanding Egyptian control over vast territories in the Levant. He's often considered one of Egypt's greatest military leaders, earning the nickname Napoleon of Ancient Egypt.
Wow, Napoleon of Ancient Egypt. That's a pretty impressive title. So he was a successful conqueror, but what about his legacy beyond the battlefield? What else did he accomplish during his reign?
Thutmose III wasn't just a warrior, he was also a patron of the arts and a prolific builder. He commissioned numerous temples and monuments, including additions to the Karnak temple complex, one of the largest and most impressive religious sites in ancient Egypt.
So he was a builder as well as a conqueror. It seems like a common theme among Egyptian pharaohs, this desire to leave behind a lasting legacy in stone. But what about his personal life? What do we know about Thutmose III the man, beyond his military exploits and building projects?
That's where things get a bit more challenging. While we have detailed records of his military campaigns and building projects, his personal life is more of a mystery. We know he had several wives and children, but the details of his family life are largely lost to history.
It's a reminder that even with all the grand monuments and inscriptions, there are still gaps in our understanding of these ancient figures. But speaking of fascinating pharaohs, let's talk about his successor, Amenhotep III.
Amenhotep III was Thutmose III's grandson and inherited a vast and powerful empire. His reign marked a period of peace and prosperity, and he's often considered one of the most successful pharaohs of the New Kingdom.
So he was more of a peacetime ruler? Did he focus on consolidating the gains made by his predecessors rather than expanding the empire further?
Exactly. Amenhotep III was a skilled diplomat and a shrewd administrator. He focused on maintaining stability within the empire, strengthening trade relationships with neighboring kingdoms, and embarking on ambitious building projects that showcased Egypt's wealth and power.
What kind of building projects did he undertake? Did he have a particular architectural style or a favorite god he liked to honor?
He built numerous temples, palaces, and monuments throughout Egypt, including the famous Colossi of Memnon, two massive statues of himself that stand guard at the entrance to his mortuary temple. He was also a devoted follower of the god Amun, the king of the gods in the Egyptian pantheon.
So he was a bit of a showman, building grand monuments to impress his subjects and foreign dignitaries.
You could say that. He certainly understood the power of imagery and symbolism. His building projects weren't just about personal vanity. They were a way to reinforce his authority, showcase Egypt's prosperity, and honor the gods.
It makes you wonder what motivated these pharaohs. Was it purely a thirst for power, a desire to be remembered, or a genuine belief in their divine mandate to rule and shape the world around them?
It's a complex question, and I suspect the answer varied from pharaoh to pharaoh. Some were driven by ambition, others by piety, and some by a combination of both. But regardless of their motivations, their actions had a profound impact on the course of Egyptian history.
Speaking of impactful pharaohs, I'm eager to hear about Amenhotep III's son, Akhenaten. He's the one who tried to revolutionize Egyptian religion, right?
Yeah.
Introducing this whole monotheistic worship of the sun disk, Akhenaten.
Ah, yes, Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh. He was a truly enigmatic figure who attempted to overturn centuries of tradition with his radical religious reforms. His reign was a period of upheaval and change, and his story is full of intrigue and mystery.
It sounds like a dramatic shift from his father's reign of peace and stability. What prompted such a drastic change? Was there something about his upbringing or his personality that led him down this path?
It's still debated, but it seems Akhenaten was genuinely convinced of Aten's supremacy. He wasn't just trying to consolidate power or shake things up. He seems to have experienced a genuine religious epiphany. He changed his own name, which originally honored the god Amun, to Akhenaten, meaning effective for Aten, and he moved the capital from Thebes to a new city he built called Akhetaten, dedicated to the worship of Aten.
Wow, that's going all in on your beliefs. But I imagine this didn't go over well with everyone, especially the priests of Amuno, who were essentially losing their power and influence.
You're absolutely right. Akhenaten's reforms were met with resistance from the powerful priestly class who saw their traditional beliefs and authority being undermined. He closed temples dedicated to other gods and even persecuted those who clung to the old ways.
So he wasn't just promoting a new god, he was actively suppressing the old ones. That's a pretty bold move, even for a pharaoh.
It was a risky strategy, and it ultimately backfired. After Akhenaten's death, there was a swift return to traditional polytheistic beliefs, and his legacy was largely erased by his successors. His city, Akhetaten, was abandoned and fell into ruin, and his name was stricken from official records.
It's a reminder that even the most powerful rulers can't always control the course of history. But what about his family? Didn't he have a son who became quite famous? I'm talking about Tutankhamun, of course.
Ah, yes, Tutankhamun, the boy king. He came to the throne at a young age, around 9 years old, and his reign was marked by the restoration of traditional religious practices and a return to stability after the upheaval of Akhenaten's reign.
So he was basically tasked with cleaning up the mess his father created.
Essentially. He reversed many of Akhenaten's reforms, reopening the temples dedicated to other gods, restoring Amun to his place of prominence, and moving the capital back to Thebes. He even changed his name, which originally included a reference to Aten, to Tutankhamun, emphasizing his allegiance to the traditional god Amun.
It's fascinating how these power struggles and religious reforms played out on such a grand scale, shaping the lives of millions of people. But what about Tutankhamun's legacy beyond his role in restoring the old order? Why is he so famous today?
His fame primarily stems from the accidental preservation of his tomb, which was discovered in 1922 virtually intact, filled with treasures and artifacts that provided an unprecedented glimpse into ancient Egyptian burial practices.
Right. The discovery of King Tut's tomb was a global sensation. Those golden masks, the elaborate sarcophagus, it captured the imaginations of people worldwide and sparked a renewed fascination with ancient Egypt.
It was a remarkable find, but let's not forget that Tutankhamun's reign, though short, played a crucial role in stabilizing Egypt after a period of religious and political turmoil. He helped restore a sense of order and continuity, paving the way for the reigns of some of Egypt's most powerful pharaohs, including the legendary Ramesses II.
Ramesses II, Ramesses the Great. Now we're talking. He's the one who built those massive temples at Abu Simbel and fought those epic battles against the Hittites, right?
You got it. Ramesses II was a larger-than-life figure who ruled for an incredible 66 years, leaving behind a legacy of grand monuments, military conquests, and even an unprecedented peace treaty.
Okay, I'm officially hooked. Tell me more about this legendary pharaoh. What made him so great?
His reign marked a high point of Egyptian power and influence. He was a prolific builder, commissioning countless temples, monuments, and statues throughout Egypt. He was also a skilled military leader, leading his armies to victory in numerous battles, including the famous Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites.
The Battle of Kadesh, I've heard about that one.
Mm.
Wasn't it one of the largest chariot battles in ancient history?
It was a massive clash of empires with thousands of chariots and soldiers involved. It's often depicted in Egyptian art as a glorious victory for Ramesses II, but the actual outcome was more of a stalemate.
So a bit of pharaonic propaganda, exaggerating their victories for posterity.
It's certainly possible. Pharaohs were known for embellishing their accomplishments, but even without the embellishments, Ramesses II's achievements were impressive.
What else did he accomplish besides waging war and building monuments? Did he do anything to improve the lives of ordinary Egyptians?
He was a shrewd administrator who oversaw a period of economic prosperity and stability. He reformed the legal system, improved infrastructure, and promoted trade. He also seems to have been a popular ruler, beloved by his subjects, at least according to the numerous inscriptions and texts that praise his virtues.
It sounds like he was a master of both hard power and soft power, combining military might with diplomacy and savvy leadership. But even great empires eventually decline, and Ramses II lived to be a very old man. What happened after his incredibly long reigns?
The glorious reign of Ramesses II had come to an end, and the empire he left behind was facing a confluence of challenges that would test its resilience and ultimately lead to its decline.
So even the great Ramesses couldn't escape the inevitable cycle of rise and fall. What were some of the key factors that contributed to this decline? Was it simply a matter of his successors being less capable rulers?
While Ramesses II's exceptionally long reign did create some instability as his numerous heirs vied for power, there were deeper issues at play. Remember those sea peoples who ravaged the eastern Mediterranean during the Late Bronze Age?
Right, those mysterious seafaring raiders who caused chaos and disruption across the region. Didn't Ramesses II actually fight them off earlier in his reign?
He did, and his victory at the Battle of the Delta was a significant achievement, preventing the Sea Peoples from gaining a foothold in Egypt. However, those victories came at a cost. The constant warfare drained Egypt's resources and left them vulnerable to other threats.
So it was like a Pyrrhic victory. They won the battles, but weakened themselves in the process.
Exactly. And the Sea Peoples weren't the only challenge they faced. Internal strife, economic woes, and even climate change played a role in their decline.
Didn't you mention something about a worker strike during this period? It seems hard to imagine something like that happening in ancient Egypt with their rigid social hierarchy and the absolute power of the pharaoh.
It was not exactly chaos, but they certainly entered a period of instability and decline. They faced renewed threats from the Libyans to the west and the Nubians to the south. Remember those Nubian kings who had adopted many aspects of Egyptian culture?
Right, they even call themselves sons of Amun. It's fascinating how the roles seem to reverse, with the former colony now challenging the authority of their former rulers.
It's a testament to the fluidity of power dynamics in the ancient world. And in a surprise turn of events, a Nubian king named Pi actually managed to conquer much of Egypt and establish the 25th dynasty, ruling as a pharaoh.
Wow, so Egypt was ruled by a Nubian pharaoh. That's a pretty big deal. How did the Egyptians react to this foreign ruler?
It seems Pi was a shrewd and pragmatic leader. He respected Egyptian traditions and presented himself as a legitimate pharaoh, even restoring temples and monuments that had fallen into disrepair.
So he wasn't just a conqueror. He was a restorer, a preserver of Egyptian culture. That's a fascinating twist. But if he was so successful, why didn't the Nubian dynasty last longer?
Unfortunately for Pa and his successors, they faced a new and formidable threat: the Assyrian Empire. By this point, the Assyrians had become a major power in the ancient Near East, known for their ruthless military campaigns and their vast empire.
Right, they were kind of like the bullies of the ancient world, conquering everyone in their path. So how did the Nubian pharaohs fare against these Assyrian invaders?
They put up a valiant fight, but ultimately they were no match for the Assyrian military machine. The Assyrian king, Esarhaddon, eventually conquered Egypt, marking the beginning of a new era of foreign rule.
So the Nubian dynasty was short-lived, and Egypt fell into the control of yet another foreign power. It's a reminder that even in decline, Egypt remained a coveted prize, a strategic and culturally significant land that attracted the attention of ambitious empires.
You're absolutely right. And after the Assyrians, Egypt would be ruled by the Persians, the Greeks under Alexander the Great, and finally the Romans. Each of these empires left their own mark on Egypt, but throughout these centuries of foreign rule, Egyptian culture and traditions persisted, adapting to these new influences while retaining a distinct character.
It's remarkable how resilient their culture was, surviving centuries of conquest and change. But what about their language? Didn't we talk about how knowledge of hieroglyphs faded as Egypt came under foreign influence?
Yes, as Egypt became increasingly integrated into these larger empires, the use of hieroglyphs declined. By the Roman period, it was a dying language, known only to a select few priests and scholars.
So the language of the pharaohs was lost.
Yeah.
It seems like a tragic end to such a rich and vibrant culture.
It seemed that way for centuries. Those mysterious hieroglyphs remained a tantalizing puzzle, a lost language whispering secrets from a bygone era. But, as we know, the story doesn't end there.
Right. The discovery of the Rosetta Stone in 1799 changed everything. It was like finding the key to unlock a hidden treasure chest of knowledge.
Exactly. The Rosetta Stone, with its inscriptions in Greek, Demotic script, and hieroglyphs, provided scholars with the tool they needed to decipher those ancient symbols, bringing the voices of the pharaohs back to life after centuries of silence.
It's a powerful reminder that even though civilizations may rise and fall, their stories can endure, waiting to be rediscovered and reinterpreted by future generations.
And as we conclude our deep dive into ancient Egypt, it's worth reflecting on what their story teaches us about our own place in the grand sweep of history.
What are some of the key takeaways? What lessons can we learn from the triumphs and failures of this long-lasting civilization?
Perhaps it's a reminder that even the most powerful empires are not immune to change. Internal strife, economic challenges, environmental shifts, and the emergence of new technologies can all contribute to the decline of even the most sophisticated societies.
It's a sobering thought, especially as we face our own set of global challenges today. But is there a more hopeful message we can take away from their story?
Absolutely. The resilience of Egyptian culture, its ability to adapt and evolve over centuries of foreign rule, is a testament to the enduring power of human ingenuity and creativity. Their story reminds us that even in the face of adversity, human societies can find ways to preserve their traditions, reinvent themselves, and leave behind a lasting legacy.
It's been an incredible journey through time, exploring the wonders and complexities of ancient Egypt. Thank you for sharing your insights and bringing this ancient civilization to life.
I hope our listeners have enjoyed this deep dive as much as we have.
If you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to like and subscribe. Until next time, keep exploring.